everyone. Thanks for having me. I hope you've had a great conference day thus far. I hope to close this out with something near and dear to my heart, which is Gatsby. And we're going to get into a lot of cool technical bits. So the talk title here is Gatsby is Evolving. Just want to welcome everyone old and new to the Jamstack. We're Gatsby, and we can't wait to see what you'll build this year. But what is Gatsby? Today, web applications are comprised of disparate data sources, and Gatsby has a data layer that can source content and data from anywhere, and it gives you a consistent API to build beautiful web applications. So literally, you can source content and data from anywhere. Nowadays, in our ecosystem, we're grabbing data from any different third-party tool. You know, a lot of us are running maybe headless CMSs, we're storing data in Airtable, we have Algolia to do our search. But if you were to just implement each one of these third-party APIs into your application, you're going to find yourself doing different things each time to integrate. All different providers have different certain installation and initialization steps, and that's where Gatsby comes in. We want to be that middle layer. Gatsby has a rich plugin ecosystem, and it helps you connect data from services like CMSs, Airtable, Shopify, and it helps assemble it into a really unified GraphQL API. At Gatsby, we call this the content mesh. It's the central layer between the data of your application and the front-end code. Gatsby also has a build system coupled with React to essentially help you build blazing fast applications with great Lighthouse scores and good core web vitals. Gatsby also has Gatsby Cloud, and Gatsby Cloud is the Jamstack delivery platform for Gatsby. It's fast, secure, scalable, and available now. With Gatsby Cloud, you have a whole Jamstack toolchain that can build your application really fast and deploy it to a CDN instantly. Plus, you don't have to sweat the details with setting up cloud infrastructure. We got you. Gatsby Cloud also has CMS previews, which is often a feature that's lacking in a lot of headless CMSs. With Gatsby Cloud, you can preview draft content and share with all the stakeholders before you hit publish to production. When I look back at 2021, I noticed that a lot of developer tools are becoming cloud native. But what is cloud native? Cloud native is a set of tools and practices that allow organizations to build, deploy, and operate software applications more frequently, predictably, and reliably. They leverage a network of cloud resources for tasks that may happen in your applications. And you would normally do these on a single machine or a single process or even just a single VM. If you don't believe me, a really good example came out last year, which is GitHub Codespaces. Codespaces is a cloud native environment for GitHub, which GitHub is now using for their engineering teams. It makes a lot of sense. GitHub is a huge distributed system. It has tons of different languages and services going on. And with Codespaces, engineers get a cloud version of VS Code. They get environments with different VM sizes and a standardized dev environment across your team. We're thinking about this experience a lot here at Gatsby. But for us to get to this utopia, we had to do a lot of things in 2021 to kind of bridge that gap. So we're going to talk about the 2021 recap here at Gatsby. And the theme was really shifting left. And the word shifting left means if you assume, or if you imagine, that dynamic is over here and static is over here. Well, in the beginning of 2021, Gatsby was what you would normally be hearing in the Jamstack as the SSG, static site generator. And that's true, that's where it was. But where we're headed is not necessarily fully dynamic, it's like somewhere in between, right? So that's where we're going, that's where we were headed, and that's where we're continuing to go. Somewhere in between, but definitely not as static as before. In 2021, we released fundamental building blocks for the future. One, we released Gatsby Hosting. We partnered with Fastly to release Gatsby Hosting and provide an easy way to get your applications to production. All of our S3 users thanked us. It's so easy to enable Gatsby Hosting for your project. If you're using Gatsby Cloud, You just connect a domain, we'll generate the Let's Encrypt certificates, and you're off to the races. Next, we released Gatsby Cloud Functions. I think Cloud Functions had a lot of hype last year as to add the dynamic pieces to your applications, whether you want to do form submission, read from third-party data. We wanted to bring the dynamic world of serverless APIs, but in a way that's native to Gatsby. We wanted it to feel as part of your application as opposed to something you deploy on the side, which people feel that pain a lot when they're using AWS Cloud Functions alongside an S3 or CloudFront distribution. So having that native in Gatsby is super nice because you're co-locating your functions with your UI code. We also shipped something really interesting. Gatsby 4, which we shipped just a couple months ago, it ships with Gatsby DB, which is a new data store that we are leveraging to help Gatsby Cloud scale, as well as people running Gatsby on their own machines, maybe in Circle CI and such. What Gatsby DB allows the user to kind of get back is the pain of debugging out of memory issues. So we've reduced peak memory utilization. If you use Gatsby in a bigger project in the past, you notice that build times may have been slow, or maybe your machine ran out of memory and it's constantly frustrating, right? With Gatsby DB, we allowed the machine to utilize all CPU cores. Prior to this, Gatsby was using Redux to kind of manage state. And now we're using something called LMDB, which is Lightning Memory Mapped Database Manager, which has a lot of really interesting benefits. And we use the node port of this. The maintainer is Dr. Evidence on GitHub. Shout out to him for really having a well-maintained library. It's kind of changed the life of a lot of Gatsby customers. Before, we had some customers who couldn't do a warm build. In the static world, a warm build is your second, third build where you don't have to rebuild things you've already built before, as opposed to what we call a cold build. Well, with Gatsby DB, these customers can actually do warm builds. So imagine waiting an hour and a half for every build. Now your second, third, fourth builds are 50% less, which is awesome. By creating this data store as an external database, it gives you an interesting property because if you can export your database, you can restore it. And if you can restore it, you can restore it in a worker, a serverless function. I guess where I'm getting at is you can query the data layer of Gatsby outside of Gatsby. And that's really powerful. So here's a little diagram. So we have the main Gatsby process, and Gatsby is just a huge build manager where it's doing different tasks for your website. It'll be gathering data, generating HTML pages, deploying cloud functions, what have you. And with Gatsby DB, all these data requirements that are needed for your specific service within Gatsby, let's say you're doing image processing or fetching data from a CMS, with a shared data store like this, we can actually parallelize a lot of that work. We can run different tasks that are in parallel. You don't have to have sequential wait time. And if we're talking about cloud native here, this is definitely a glimpse in the future of how we can scale different Gatsby tasks across thousands of workers. We'll get into more of that later. What's really cool is these workers, they have access to the Gatsby DB to fetch any of the disparate data sources you need, and then it can do whatever it needs to do in that worker. All right, now we're gonna get into the acronym world. Last year we deployed, at the end of this last year, we came out with different rendering strategies. I was mentioning Gatsby was shifting left. And with these new rendering strategies, we actually give the choice to the user. How do you want to build your application? SSG is fine. What is SSG? Static site generation. The user wants to build their site fully at build time. They don't mind taking extra time to build files. A lot of the build process is generating tons of files and JavaScript files, images, etc. They don't mind. And at the right scale, let's say it's 100,000 pages, this might be the best UX available. It really depends on what kind of data you have, because pages don't directly match scale. It's really about how much data you need to create the page, and how much time are you willing to wait for that page to be, one, to get the data it needs, and then to generate all the files for it to be served. Some people may be fine with this, but if you're running like an e-commerce site and time is money, you maybe not have that luxury. So we wanted to introduce other strategies for users to build their applications. I'll explain static site generation as it's in the reflection of Gatsby Cloud. So Gatsby Site Visitor will come into Gatsby. It's deployed on Gatsby hosting. It'll ask for a certain page, which will then correspond to a certain file. We will get the request. It comes into the hosting layer. And then we tell a Gatsby Cloud worker to pull the file from a file storage in the cloud. And then we'll return that response. And with Fastly's help, we'll cache it in the CDN. On a second request, this file is cached at the CDN, and your file is returned very quickly. Next is server-side rendering. This was the one that everyone was asking us for probably 4 years now. We finally got it to you at the end of the year. Server-side rendering generates the full HTML for a page on the server. It's for developers who are making hybrid websites, and they need to create personalized, real-time, and secure applications. So for us, a lot of, with the content mesh, we have a certain way of sourcing data, but you may have your own APIs. You may want to hit up like a third-party A/B testing service like Optimizely or LaunchDarkly. Like these are other use cases as like an escape hatch from SSG, right? Not everything has to be static. And we wanted to give this rendering mode. So it's up to you. If you have use cases that require, one, you're not waiting for long times for builds for certain pages, or you just have data sources that aren't really compatible with the ecosystem of Gatsby right now, or data that needs to change and is real time, or as time is a factor, SSR is for you. And it doesn't have to be every page. It's only the pages that you kind of specify. So in server-side rendering, a request comes through to Gatsby hosting, and it's a cache miss. Our hosting router then sends this request to a Gatsby Cloud worker, and it'll run a function called getServerData. So if we're going to get into more in this later, but with enabling this mode, all you have to do is export one of these functions, getServerData, and that'll do the calculations, whatever the user specifies. If you want to go fetch something, that's the place to do it. And then it'll return that result as props to your component. And then it's the same old React rendering that we do today, where we will then render the page and send it back to the user. By default, SSR pages do not get cached, but you can set cache headers through this getServerData function. And then, that's perfect if you want to, if you're doing calculations with computations and you want to just cache them for a small amount of time. All right, last is our most exciting one, which is deferred static generation. This is called DSG. It's for large websites and businesses that need the performance of static sites without the wait time that comes with large sites. So we have a lot of customers that 100,000, 200,000 types of pages. And at some point, static feels really like a bad decision all of a sudden, because you're waiting an hour and a half to build a site and you just changed like a couple pages, you did very minor things, yet you're getting taxed by the whole build process. And we feel the pain too, we totally recognize it. And I just want to apologize for everyone having to waste time, or our tools letting us say that it's okay to grab 5-minute coffee breaks or 20-minute coffee breaks between builds. Like, that's not a productive world for us if we're trying to scale static and we're trying to ship our applications. So this tax, we jokingly, it's like an internal kind of joke, we call this the jam tax. You don't understand the jam tax when you enter the Jamstack ecosystem, but you start feeling it later when you stick around. It's almost like you're charging for your citizenship here. But it shouldn't be that way. And that's what DSG aims to solve. So in DSG, the first request is a cache miss. And we send, just like with anything else, we'll send that request to the Gatsby Cloud worker. And it'll leverage the Gatsby DB to run any page queries that it needs to fulfill the data of the page, right? And once the page is generated, it gets sent back to the user immediately. In the background, we store all the generated files from building that page in our cloud storage. So after this first run, it's essentially an SSG page again. On a second request, because Gatsby Cloud has done the dance, and it'll just bypass the cloud worker, and it'll grab the files necessary straight from the file cache. And if you happen to have that response already cached by the CDN, which you probably have, then you're going to get that page faster because it's cached at the CDN pop relative to you, and you'll get a direct response. I think with Gatsby Cloud, Gatsby hosting, and these new rendering strategies, I think we're becoming a really good platform for building on the web. You have the data layer that really kind of puts all these pieces together, and you have a really great user experience that kind of like forms it as well. So we're going to do a little demo. Let me switch over to this. This is Gatsby Cloud, and this is a little demo. I want to kind of put us all in a different lens for a second. I'm starting a new startup, okay? It's called Pup Snuggles. And what is Pup Snuggles? If you love dogs and you love Snuggles, then you're going to schedule time with the best dogs on this planet. And so this is my app. It's a Gatsby app, and it has pretty much all the features we've been talking about for 2021. So first, we'll walk through the app. Like, authentication is a big deal for most apps. And with Gatsby functions, we're able to do OAuth with Gatsby functions. You can write in a function to create OAuth clients, and you can write redirect functions that will then exchange your codes for access tokens, and then you can use that to then do whatever you like for authentication. So we'll sign in with Google. I think I'm already signed in, but now it just did a OAuth handshake, and now we're in the catalog. So this is my catalog. It's all the cool puppies that we have and dogs that we have for you to snuggle. This data here is sourced from Contentful. And I'll pull up Contentful here. This is my Contentful space. And I have all my dogs and cats here. We'll get into cats in a second, all you cat lovers. But here's my catalog. I can view the details and see, like, okay, for Bozo, this is his title, image, and description. Now, if I wanted to change, some information about this, I'll go into Bozo's post here in Contentful. Let me make some changes. He is a great dog and is dope. He must support the Lakers. Then I'm going to click Open Preview. And this is going to go to an intermediate router. So we're now in Gatsby Cloud territory. We're using our CMS preview product to rebuild the site with just this change. I'm not publishing it to production, but I'm keeping it in a preview environment. And now, if I wanted to go and share this with my colleagues, I can to show, hey, this is now, this is what the change that you wanted me to make. Does it look good? Okay, great. Well, I think it looks super nice, so I'm going to publish it. If I head back to our Gatsby Cloud dashboard and I kind of go to our builds list, you'll see that the data update from Contentful came in, and now we're publishing this change to production. So that's cool. I know all of you listening are wondering, like, how do you make money in this business? Like Snuggles, like how much does it cost? Well, with any good business and in this day and age, it's time to use Stripe to kind of purchase things. I'm going to purchase a Snuggle session with Bozo here. And this is yet another Gatsby Cloud function that kind of takes advantage of Stripe's checkout API. And I'll save you the boringness of entering a credit card field. Okay, so that's Pup Snuggles, and that's kind of the feature list there. I had a lot of users come to me and they said that I was discriminatory against them because I didn't support cats. Well, I don't know if I necessarily want to support cats. I'm a dog guy, So I don't know if cats are my thing. Maybe I should do an A/B test, because I should probably know how many people are coming in or would really like to snuggle cats or dogs. So I partnered up with my friends here at Launch Darkly, and I created a pet police. I don't know, it was just a random cute name that I was thinking of. And right now we're serving 100% dog traffic. Well, let me just turn this off and I'll save the change. Okay, cool. And let me just refresh my page here. Nice, we're in cat snuggles territory. So I just turned targeting off, but I could have done rollout percentages like 50-50, 20-30, whatever, 20-80, whatever. But now I can see, okay, like how many of these people or customers want to snuggle cats? And the cool thing with Launch Darkly is you can actually run experiments. And you can see like, okay, based on my snuggle CTA, which is right here, how many people are clicking on dogs versus cats? Dogs are winning right now. So maybe I should stay in the dog business. So how this works, and we're gonna get into code in a little bit here, but how this works is this catalog page is run through the SSR rendering mode. So let's actually get into the code, and I'll get back into my slideshow here. Cool. So first we'll talk about the Google auth, right? Here we are doing some copied code I got from Stack Overflow, or the tutorial, and I put it into a Gatsby Cloud function. In Gatsby, when you want to do cloud functions, we have a reserved folder called the API folder. And I just put express style handlers in there, and it automatically gets deployed to Gatsby Cloud and hosting. And now I have that functionality. So here I'm just setting up an OAuth 2 client, I'm generating an auth URL, and I'm redirecting the user there. Next, I'm doing the OAuth handshake. So that already happened. And then after that, I'm doing a callback, right? With every OAuth, you do a callback. And in this callback, I'm gonna exchange the code I got from OAuth with an access token. And then I'm gonna redirect the user back to the UI. In this case, we're going to the catalog. All right, so if we're talking about the catalog page now, I fetched that data with GraphQL. I have a query that fetches all animals. So I'm fetching both all the contentful dogs and all the contentful cats. And I'm gonna have that data available for the catalog. Next, I'm gonna enable SSR. So here I'm just exporting a get server data function. It's gonna look for, you get the context of the request. So you can get the cookie headers and see if you have a session ID. If you don't, you'll create one. Then you can call into Launch Darkly, get variant to see if the session ID is either going to be dog or cat. And then you can set the cookie for, in the case that you didn't have a session ID, the response can set a cookie, and as well, we'll return the data of that experiment to our component. And that should be available as props. So at the end, it's just React. Now I have my catalog component. It has data from Gatsby, which is the GraphQL layer that we talked about with the contentful dogs and cats API. And then we have server data. And server data is the computation we did in the get server data call. And now this just looks like React, right? Like I have props, and now I'm gonna build a UI on. So that's my app. You all should invest tons of money and time snuggling dogs or cats, because we support both. All right, so we're done talking about 2021. I hope everyone enjoyed that. But let's talk about 2022. In 2022, we're gonna just pretty much be doubling down on the things I presented here, but we also want to explore a few more ideas. So now Gatsby is somewhat monolithic. It does a lot of things, and it does it in a single process. We've done some advancements within that process, like just having no child workers, parallelizing as much as we can. But if we're truly to be cloud native, we need to decouple the monolith. We need to run these different tasks that Gatsby requires for a successful build. We need to run them on different resources. And now that we have this cloud native environment powered by Gatsby hosting, the Gatsby tool is now an orchestrator. It's not necessarily an SSG or a server-side rendering platform. It's not a functions platform. It's kind of an orchestrator. It's the conductor of how you're going to get your application made. And when using cloud native, that means we can take all these different tasks and just span them across. We can just throw, I like to call it, say, give it more juice, right? We can give juice to all these tasks, run them across several workers in the cloud. And now build times, the jam tax goes down because we're getting smarter about how we run these things. And also a lot of that stuff is like overcomplicated to do, you know? I wouldn't want other or Gatsby users themselves having to worry about any of this stuff. So I think it's really on Gatsby's responsibility to make it very transparent to the user that, hey, this stuff is happening in the background, but you never had to think about it. You just get the benefits. You just get to write React. So that's kind of the goal here. And that's where we're going to be really going deep in 2022 is figure out how can we scale Gatsby in the cloud to make it better for every user. So that's one thing. Another thing, this one's a little complicated, but there's two main feature requests that we get a lot. So hopefully this gets people excited if you use Gatsby. One is like a pre-route middleware. So before you actually go to a route on your site, maybe you want to do something. And when I say do something, there's a lot of things you could do, right? You can check if someone's authenticated. And that's what we're going to go through this example with that context. Like, I need to check if someone's authenticated before I give them this page. So a user visits a login route or a page that is blocked by authentication. So you would be able to configure this pre-route middleware, much like an express middleware, that will do some type of computation and then notify us that, hey, like, is this unauthenticated? Well, if it's not, then they should go to the login page and kind of go through this flow again. If they are authenticated, is the page that they're looking at, is that an SSG page? And if so, okay, let's give them the results. Is it a DSG or deferred static generation page? Cool. Or maybe is it some SSR page that we need to render? And so that's kind of this whole ecosystem that will happen before you hit a page. This kind of really opens up the doors for something like A/B testing. A/B testing is the second feature that people keep talking to us about. They want to bring experimentation into their platform. Now, I did A/B testing in the PubSnuggles app, but that's not necessarily the Gatsby way, right? It's not integrated into the platform. I had to kind of bring it to the platform. I think one thing we're going to be really investigating is how can we leverage our infrastructure, partner up with other maybe A/B testing providers, but give it in a way, much like we did for Gatsby Functions, where this is integrated into your application. So I just want to say thank you for having me today. This was really fun. I know we talked about a lot of things and we can talk about them more. You can always find me on Twitter at Abhi Aiyer. And yeah, thank you.
All right, Abhi, thank you so much. What a great presentation. Thank you for all of those cat and dog snuggles. Amazing, amazing. I forgot to mention before we got started here that if you have any questions for Abhi, drop them in the Ask a Questions little panel at the bottom of your screen. I have a handful. That was super interesting to me. So let's start with the jam tax. I hadn't heard that term, but I find it really interesting. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that for our attendees. Like, why is it so exciting and in a lot of cases really maybe simple even to get started with the Jamstack, but what is it that makes it more complicated to scale and maintain over time?
Yeah, so when applications start out in the Jamstack, maybe they have single data sources. Let's just say you were building a WordPress site and you're just starting out, so you're creating posts and pages. But after a while, you're publishing your blogs for a year, or you're publishing new content for a year. You've accumulated content, different content models, images, which is a big one, tons of images, I'm sure, and any other media. And after a while, you're having different items that are cross-linked within different pages. Everyone's built a similar articles component, I'm sure. So once you have this big data graph, because it's not just your data from your CMS, now you're like in the world of, you have posts, posts have authors, authors may have many posts, and that scales to plenty of numbers. You start changing an author's name, well, now you're updating 100,000 pages, right? Because they are a popular author. You start changing certain pieces of data that are found on many other pages. A great example is like the nav bar. Your nav bar is everywhere on all your pages. You change an item there, now you're building every page on your site. So that's where the Jamstack comes in, or that's where it starts to feel noticeable, is because you're starting to build an application like you should. It's all making sense. Like none of this doesn't make sense. It's just the time that it takes to go and build all those things. Plus you want responsive images, different image formats, different thumbnails and different screen sizes. You can just imagine the cruft gets built up. It's not even cruft, it's just the complexity grows, and now you have this big tax you're paying.
Okay, that it makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned in your in the SSG portion that it used to be the way that you would build a 100,000 page website, and you would be waiting a long time for that to build. So it seems like DSG in Gatsby's terms is a good answer to that. What I'm curious about is, what would you consider, what's technically the difference between DSG and SSR with caching enabled?
That's a great question. So there isn't much of a difference, except the latency that you may have on the first runs of these things. I think for us, like DSG is like I mentioned this in the talk, but we're trying to do things the Gatsby way. So like, meaning like, how would this fit into our framework? And so we have, like with DSG, you get access to Gatsby's data layer, and it's a first-class citizen. Therefore, like the querying of the data for the page is a lot faster. And then with SSR, it's still similar to this, but you're gonna have to then maintain the cache policies and stuff for pages that, you're putting more onus on the user to kind of figure out how the application should behave. So if it's a pure static page and the data is relatively static, then if you're using DSG or SSG, like and Gatsby, like you're gonna get these common best practices for dealing with those file types. HTML, JSON, what's the max age? Are they immutable, mutable? And that's where the CDN plays in. And with SSR, the data is for more that's ever changing. You could do the same kind of business, like I'm not against it, but we've built this certain mode to serve that need. And we've kind of outlined that the SSR piece is for a different use case.
Okay, so in both cases, your goal is the same. You're trying to optimize the performance and get the content to the user as quickly as you can. But how a developer maybe should think about the difference has more to do with the maybe the frequency at which the content is changing. Is that what you would say?
Correct. It's definitely about content frequency, because the most expensive part is updating content. And if it never changes, then we should never do any work to change it again. And with SSR, you kind of leave yourself open for a cache bust and then having to do work unnecessarily.
That makes sense. Okay, we've got a question here from Steve that says, is Gatsby Cloud running on an existing cloud service such as AWS, perhaps enabling Gatsby Cloud functions to integrate with other AWS work that we've done?
Our platform is actually on Google Cloud. We partnered up with them almost 3 years ago. Our cloud function environment is run through something called Knative, and using Anthos. It's called Google Cloud Anthos, Cloud Run for Anthos. I'm sorry, it's like so many words in all the products these days. So we do that there. Users who are rolling their own stuff, like you could deploy Gatsby Cloud functions to your S3. It's not something that we've written for you, but people in the community have already started to do that. There are a lot of self-hosted individuals out there that we've helped them kind of figure that out. I would also recommend against it because we have all the monitoring logs, everything set up for you, and it's really like you don't have to do anything to enable it. You just have to use Gatsby Cloud. I guess that's kind of the stickiness of the product a little bit. So I would recommend using Gatsby Cloud, but if you're already with the S3, deploying to S3, then I would look into the community and figure out, see what the other solutions are for taking Gatsby functions and putting them in S3 or not in AWS. Sorry.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I know that that tends to be a common refrain in this Jamstack space is like just the ability to take all these different tools and kind of marry them together to be your individual architecture for to solve your specific needs. So with that is okay. Question would be: does SSR and DSG, can you get those to work without Gatsby Cloud? Like if we deployed to a Netlify or a Vercel?
It's not supported in Vercel. Netlify did a great job trying to have a parity with us, and so it is available through their Gatsby plugin. I will say though, like I said with the other things, we've designed it to work best in Gatsby Cloud. That's the advantage of owning the framework. So, but like if you're already using Netlify and stuff, I'm not going to say go to your boss right now and tell them to change. It's just not going to be as good. Also, if you're an image-heavy site, Netlify's version still needs to work on some issues with generating images in different thumbnails, etc., on a DSG render. So there's some complexity there that you have to be kind of close to the problem, really, to get it immediately, like we did when we launched it. But they're a fast follow, so Netlify is definitely another option. But I'm not going to recommend it publicly.
but this makes sense. This makes sense. Okay, so similar related question is, all right, so if we look at somebody like Vercel, they, technically you can use Next in other places, but it often takes some extra configuration, and it's going to be easiest to use it with Vercel, but you can also use other static site generators, front-end frameworks, and deploy them to Vercel. So I suppose this is a two-part question. One, is it possible to use other frameworks with Gatsby Cloud? And two, is that if not, is that something that you're considering, or is it solely focusing on the Gatsby product?
Yeah, so I think let me answer this question a little bit more broadly, and I'll get into it. So today, Gatsby is very much like linked together with React and having this whole build pipeline. I feel like it's like the build time wars of the past with Grunt versus etc. Our goal for 2022 and beyond is to figure out how we can make sure all the pieces of Gatsby are decoupled. So if you wanted to leverage just the data layer, you could with your own rendering. And of course, we'd have like a Gatsby rendering thing that still has our best practices involved, but maybe you bring your own front end code. And then when it comes to other frameworks, well, we're not necessarily in the business of building and supporting the Hugos of the world. But one thing that we are interested in is there are a lot of auxiliary products to Gatsby. Storybook is one of them. Sanity, if anyone out there uses Sanity, you have Sanity Studio, which is like your CMS studio. These are the types of products that are really interesting to also get involved in deploying in Gatsby Cloud, because now your Jamstack experience and anything auxiliary to it or related can all be done together, also be co-located in terms of an infrastructure. So I would say no to the other frameworks, but then the framework adjacent or the Gatsby adjacent is something that we're really interested in.
That's really interesting. And you said in the presentation, considered that Gatsby is becoming, or maybe already is, this orchestration layer more or less, and less of a traditional static site generator. And I think that's really interesting. Do you think, if you're going to predict the future, do you think that's going to become a common use case where someone might use Gatsby particularly for the data layer, but then work that data into other systems, other frameworks, and deploy it elsewhere?
I think what I'm really excited about is we have content editors out in the world that work on web, mobile, and Android. And today, the web folks are having the best time of their lives because they get to use things like Gatsby and Next. And then the iOS devs have to figure out how to write an API to WordPress and do the same exact thing the web developers are doing. You know, we've all read ESPN on our phones and those content apps. And why, you know, a lot of them don't want to do web views anymore, right? So in this new world of Gatsby as an orchestrator, you have native apps now that can just use Gatsby for data instead of React, right? Or, you know, you still have your web experience, but that same API, everyone's still speaking the same language when it comes to GraphQL. And now we've unlocked native. We've unlocked different frameworks, like not frameworks, or front-end libraries like Vue.js, Svelte, etc. And, you know, dare I say, maybe you could use Next.js with Gatsby.
That's fascinating. I just I don't know. It's got me really excited. I felt like Gatsby was all the buzz, and then Next.js is all the buzz, and now it's like we should be talking about Gatsby V4 and Gatsby in 2022. There's a lot of exciting things to come. So thank you so much, Abhi, for being here and for sharing all your experience and knowledge with us.